Hello, Embers, and welcome back to the Ember Exchange. I am your host, Dylan, and I'm joined by my other hosts here. Thank you so much for being with me.
I'm Jill.
And I'm Heidi.
We're really excited to welcome you to this, our second episode of the Ember Exchange. We've got some great topics lined up for you today, so we hope that you enjoy. Our first topic today is, in quotes, the one, I suppose. And I imagine that there are a lot of people who would know what quote unquote the one means. Mm-hmm. The one would be the one person for you, your soulmate. The one person, if you're a believer like we are, that God has planned for you as your spouse for the rest of your life. The question surrounding the one that I'd like to pose today is the one real? Is there such thing as the one? Does the one exist?
I would argue that the one doesn't exist. Yeah. I obviously love my husband very much.
Okay.
But I would argue that the one doesn't exist. And from a Christian perspective, maybe the little bit of the reasoning behind that would be the one kind of creates this expectation or this assumption that someday this magical human being is going to come into our life and change everything, make everything work out. Like this person is going to just fulfill a lot of things that you're waiting on or wanting, whatever it is, right? But it really puts a lot of weight on this hypothetical one that maybe, depending on where you are at in your life, doesn't even exist yet.
So if I hear you correctly, you're saying that having this idea of somebody being the one is inherently associated with unrealistic expectations.
I think it does set up some unrealistic expectations for sure. I think with those unrealistic expectations, you then kind of lean into a little bit of, there's this one person out there that's kind of perfect for my life, or they're going to fit right into maybe whatever we have imagined up. But no one is perfect. Mm-hmm. No human being, at least in our lifetime, right? Mm-hmm. We will someday meet the one person, the singular person that lived a perfect life.
Who is Jesus.
But that doesn't exist today. You're never going to find that in a person. So no one can really ever be perfect or perfect for you because that in and of itself is an unrealistic expectation.
I am on the side of thinking that the one does exist. I agree with everything that you're saying. Like, I don't think that the one should be idolized in our minds. And I think it can be very toxic if you're continually comparing someone that you're dating to an expectation that you have in your head. But I don't think that negates the fact that the one does exist.
How so?
Because just because people idolize the one or we have high expectations, it doesn't mean that you won't eventually find someone who checks all the boxes that you didn't even know that you had. And you have to understand, right now, today, I am a single female. So I have been in the dating sphere for 8 to 10 years. And I've liked a lot of guys who haven't liked me. There's been a lot of guys who have liked me and I haven't necessarily felt that way for them. And so that's why I do think that this idea of the one does exist. And I think it's just a very rare find when you find that person who get along with really well and you have the same mission and vision and values and you want to build a life together and both people are bought into that. I think that that's a very rare find. And I'm actually listening to The Meaning of Marriage by Timothy Keller right now. And when Timothy talks about meeting his wife for the first time and when they're initially dating, he says that it was a rare fit for his heart. His wife Kathy was. And that's where I think maybe it's not the one, but it's a very rare find where you want to commit your life to another human being and like enter into this covenant of marriage. So I don't necessarily think that you can just like pick a high quality person and another high quality person and like put them together and they have the most optimal relationship. You can have a good relationship. You can learn to love. I do believe that. But if we're talking in this context of dating, which the American world is in, where it is about finding this spark, I think that that does exist and it's not something that should be ignored.
Where do you get your basis for something like this spark existing? If we take it back to, say, a biblical perspective. Because in my understanding, not just culturally, but in the theology as is taught, there's nothing that indicates that there are two people who are uniquely made for each other. Where does this idea of this spark come from? And do you have some sort of foundation for that other than it's a nice fairy tale?
It is a nice fairy tale. But I also think that there's like certain people you just get along with better than other people. It is that romantic love, and I understand that that romantic love is short term. But I think it's important to get two people to be like magnets to each other, and then they decide that they want to keep sticking. So I think it's important for that initial attraction to be there, and that's what I would call the spark.
And there's only one person in the world that you have that with.
Yes, essentially, I think there's one person that you're going to come across in your lifetime. Like, could there be multiple throughout the entire world that you'll never meet? Sure. But you meet a limited number of people within your life, and within those limited number of people, I think there's one individual that the Lord has for us.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, there's some sort of causality here, right? There's somebody is the one, and therefore you will meet them and you will be with them forever.
Yes, if it's the Lord's will, then He will make that happen.
So can you miss the one? Because if there is one person, and let's say that your relationship with God isn't where it needs to be at a certain point, or you're not paying attention, you're not in tune with the Holy Spirit, and that person comes and goes, if we've already defined that there is a one person, presumably you could miss them.
I think that if you don't work out and you do not end up married, that they are inherently not your one.
In saying that, though, now you flip the causality, because we had established that they were already the one before you met them.
So if they're not the one, then someone else is the one.
So then there isn't one.
But they were never your one to begin with.
Because you didn't work out.
Correct.
So the definition of their oneness is hinging on whether or not the relationship works out.
Yeah. Which, does that mean that there's not a one?
I would add to that question of like, can you miss the one, with also some of the words I think that you've chosen to describe your one with. So for example, you referred to Tim and Kathy Keller.
Yeah.
Something that he had said, I'm assuming you were quoting him, yes. It is the commitment that he chose to make. He said, I'm committed, right, to Kathy and this relationship. That is distinctly a choice. You also said earlier that you were going to decide or make a decision about this person, hypothetically your one. Mm-hmm. But if there's a decision being made, I'd argue there's not a one. You are making that decision based on this person that you're currently with, instead of deciding, no, I'm going to move on to potentially the next one. But then there's not one. There are multiple people that could work, and you have chosen to make the decision to make it work with a singular person. A my one and the one, I think, are two different things, potentially.
Maybe I'll flip it on you now and echo something that Heidi was saying. There's certainly an aspect of God's foreknowledge here, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in a lot of these questions, we can come up against a bit of a, is it something that you don't have a choice about because God knows it ahead of time? Or do you have a choice? Because I think, maybe you can correct me, you having a choice does kind of seem to eliminate the idea that there is one or that you couldn't miss them. Because if you have a choice, then you could choose to miss them, in theory.
In theory.
On the flip side, Heidi is right that God does know, like God knew, that you and I were going to be married. Could you have chosen differently?
Right. And yet I do have free will. So I have a choice, but also choices that I can make. And so then I guess backing it up even like another step, it would be, do the choices we make affect God's overall plan for our lives?
Well, I don't think that we are powerful enough to undo God's will.
No, right. So I would say the answer to that is no, because we have free will. We can make choices, but that doesn't remove, obviously, God being in control of what is overarching happening in our life.
It feels like there are maybe two aspects to this. There's the very high thinking, foreknowledge, predestination aspect,
Yeah.
which is, I think, a component of it for sure. But we do exist in time. God doesn't. So
Right.
the idea that he could know something before it happens, or whether before is even a concept that makes sense to talk about with God, if he just exists and all things exist in
Right.
perpetuity for him. But the other way to think about this is there an individual that is unique to you that no other individual on earth, so talking more about maybe the personality aspect of it,
Yeah.
that is unique to you, and boy, it's really quite fortunate that you would happen to come across that one person out of all the millions of people in
Yeah.
the world.
And this is, maybe I'm going against my own argument, but I feel like it might not be the one person in the entire world, but I do think that there's a very unique person that like checks all of the boxes that leads you to choosing them as the one. So that saying that like everyone else that I've dated in my past is not the one because they did not have those unique things that complement me well and that I complement them well. Like, I do believe that there are two people who can work optimally well. Granted, I'm fresh in the relationship, and so I would love to hear your perspective of people who have been married longer. I understand that those exciting spark moments don't last forever. I get that. I understand that, but I do think they're important. So mine's more feelings based, which, you know, is okay.
Surprise, surprise.
Checks out. Do you believe, and I know the answer to this because I am married, do you believe that you will continue to learn things about the person that you choose long after you choose them to be the one?
Absolutely.
Okay. Then you would agree that it is conceivable that you could learn something or discover something about this person that had you known that before you made the commitment, the covenantal commitment of marriage, that would have disqualified them as the one. Does that make them any less the one?
I think it can make them less the one if you find that out before you've made a covenant.
So
But
the covenant is the
after-
defining.
Correct.
Point.
After you are married, as Bible believing Christians, we believe that it cannot negate the fact that you've chosen them to be the one.
So the timing of knowledge is a critical component then.
Certainly.
So your understanding, your definition of the one encompasses the entire person, correct?
Yes.
And yet you would determine somebody to be the one or not based on knowledge known prior to a certain point, and any new knowledge gained after that point doesn't change their oneness. So
Right, which is why they are the one. Like, there's the attraction, there's everything leading up to the marriage, and then within the marriage, they are your one person for forever. Like, if you don't believe in the one, then couldn't you two just, like, go and marry other people?
maybe I should define how I understand the one, because I also believe in the one, but how the one is defined is very different in my understanding.
Okay.
So the one is the person whom you choose to enter covenant marriage with.
Okay.
That is the only requirement of the one. Whoever you choose is the one, by definition, because you entered the covenant with them.
There will not be any other one.
as long as you're in the covenant relationship.
So I agree with that, but then we're going back to like finding that person, right? And then that's where we're defining if there is a one.
Correct. They
Because
don't become the
within-
one until you make the decision of covenant relationship.
See, and I think that you can understand that you're with the one before the covenant relationship happens.
And I think that that is maybe the distinction of, honestly, what culturally we are told to think versus what the Christian perspective should be on it. That's truly the distinction. There is a cultural, hey, if you don't find the one, that could mean that the one got away or you missed the one, like Dylan asked earlier. But it's all based on this kind of worldly expectation that they're going to check all of these boxes and then you'll know they're the one, so you get married. But we continue to learn all sorts of things about each other when we're married. And we also, in fact, change. And yeah, getting along and being compatible, there is a level of understanding to that. But once we're married, then everything else kind of comes out in the wash. We're married and he is the one. That's how it's going to be today, tomorrow, and forever.
Right. And so I think that there's like a progression of the one. Initially, there is that one person that stands out from the crowd, and that's where I would say that there is the one. And then as the relationship progresses, you choose that they are the one, and then like it's solidified that they are the one.
So to come a little bit out of left field, it's related, I promise. Did you know that couples in arranged marriages report significantly higher levels of happiness than those who choose their partner? Which to me says that what happens after you make the commitment is vastly more important than how you feel before you make the commitment. Not negating that, and I think maybe to combine a point that you two are both saying, I think similarly. Jill, you're saying that it's not about checking boxes. And I don't think Heidi would say it's about checking boxes either, right? As believers, there's a certain set of important non-negotiables that we have. The idea of not being unequally yoked with an unbeliever.
Yes.
But beyond that, there are preferences. Really, everything after that is preferences
Yeah.
to an extent. And so the idea is that once you make the decision with however much information you have, right, they're taking it to the extreme of, zero information, where Heidi, it sounds like you would get to a point where you feel like you have enough information to say, yes, this person is the one, or no, this person is not the one.
Correct.
And any information gained after that is irrelevant. You're a fallible person who is drawing that line based on your own understanding. Somebody who is in an arranged marriage is entering into that commitment with no prior knowledge. And so for them, they're saying also any information gained after this point is irrelevant. And somehow they have exceedingly high levels of happiness. And I think that's because they're coming into that relationship with the mindset of, I don't feel like I need to have a list of preferences to put on this person. I'm bringing 100% of myself, and I trust they're bringing 100% of themselves, and we're going to make this relationship be the best that it can be.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's a sense of maturity as well that comes along with dating and not just completely leaning on your feelings. I'm just saying that, like, without those feelings and that, like, initial attraction, that it would be an arranged marriage. And I understand that they might have a higher level of happiness in the long run. But that doesn't negate the fact that we live in America right now where we don't have arranged marriages. So in instances where you don't have an arranged marriage, I do think that there is one person who is better suited for you than another. And that just because you can't just put two Christian people together and be like, build a life together.
I think you can.
But we don't do that in our culture today.
Correct. But I think we could, and they would be equivalently the one as somebody that you would happen to pick for yourself. Because you would choose to. You would choose
You would
to
be
make them the one.
forced to choose to.
But
See, that's the
you
distinction there.
you would argue that even if it was arranged, that is still a covenant of marriage and you would honor that.
For sure.
So
But
is that
that
their
doesn't
one?
mean they're forced into the one, which I think is disappointing. And that there's a potential for something better. But just because there's a potential for something better doesn't mean that we break covenant.
They would tend to disagree, though, because they are happier than those of us who are choosing our relationships.
Because yeah, and that's probably because they have been forced to choose each other, and so therefore they have. But I don't know that it's necessary to force people into a relationship that they are
But do you think
not
that
happy about.
do you think that some of it is because comparison is the thief of joy? So we have all of these options, kind of like analysis paralysis too, right? We have so
Yeah, I
many
get that.
decisions and things to pick from and comparisons we can make, and really that's what you're doing. In all reality, you go on a first date with a handful of guys. What are you going to do? You're going to compare them. There's going to come some inherent comparison of all of them.
Yeah. There is, for better or for worse.
But in the arranged marriage situation, there's no comparison. They are going to live by the fact that they're in a covenant of marriage that they're going to choose to stay in. And so, in some ways, maybe that's why they are happier. This is the one for me. I'm going to stand by his side day by day, no matter what. And I don't know any different. Maybe that's sad to you because there is some fun to dating and meeting new people and going through that early stage of just learning new things about a person up until the point you learn the thing that makes them not the one anymore. And then you're like, and now I'm sad. Not really, but you know.
Yeah, it's inevitable.
Right, but like the fun part of it, you're like, yeah, this is great, meeting new people, going on dates, maybe getting some free dinners out of it. Who knows? At least in our case.
It's
Sorry,
fun,
dear.
but it's also exhausting.
yeah,
Yeah, that never happened.
yeah, not for you. You didn't get many free dinners.
Yeah, sorry, dude.
But right.
Sorry, man.
And so that part of it is fun. And so are you almost placing that part of it in your brain on them and saying, isn't that sad because they're being forced in this thing that they're not choosing to do because they don't get the opportunity to do all these things that I have gotten to do, which are kind of the fun part of it?
I think that all of this is God's grace in both scenarios. I think it's God's grace that He allows two people who are the families, say, like you two are going to be married, that He allows them the capacity to slowly but surely fall in love with each other and build a beautiful life. And I think it's God's grace in a maybe more sinful, warped dating world that we live in America, that He allows us to find our quote unquote one through thoughts and feelings and emotions, because we're not animals. And so I think that by negating the feelings and emotions of a dating relationship and finding that one person, I think you're kind of taking away some of the beauty of being a human being and the grace that God has given us to be able to fall in love and feel those feelings, and like it makes us human.
Boy, isn't it really great that we discovered God's plan for two people finding the one in the 20th century? It took us 7,000 years of human civilization to finally figure it out.
I'm not saying that like you have to do it this way, but this is the context in which we live today in America. And so to tell people that you're never going to find the one person or you could just like pick somebody is, I guess, in some ways comforting, but also like really disheartening.
I would say that I find it to be comforting because I never look at Jill and say, boy, she's pretty great, but did I make my decision too quick? Or did I not make my decision quick enough? Did I meet the one and pass them by? I can look at Jill and say, yeah, Jill's the one for me because I chose and I choose every day to make that the case, right? That's, I think, what love is. We use it to describe a fun, fluttery feeling. But inevitably, and you mentioned that you're aware of this, inevitably that feeling will fade. And it ebbs and flows, right? It comes and goes. And so to say that, well, I don't have that immediately, or I don't have it as strong with somebody at the beginning, that's a very temporary feeling to make a very long-term decision based on. So yes, it's fun. I'm not saying that you should pick somebody who you're not attracted to, obviously, but I do think that we place a higher emphasis on that perhaps than is necessary. And sometimes that does lead to, like Jill said, the paralysis of too many decisions. And there are people that I know who they've got caught in the trap of looking and waiting for the one until there is no more one, and they're 40 years old and they've missed the boat when there were probably a dozen guys that came along that would have been great for them. But because they were looking for the one and couldn't commit, they missed it.
In my experience, I just really truly do believe that the Lord has one person that he gives you the grace of finding and experiencing together and having those thoughts and emotions, and then you choose to build that relationship even after you find these small red flags. You're like, okay, I've built enough of a relationship with this person. I've had the feelings, I've done all the things that we're going to work through that.
It sounds like we're kind of describing the same thing.
We are. I just think that there's one person that is meant to be with, and you guys don't necessarily, you can just kind of choose that.
You also say that there's a choice component, though.
There is definitely a choice component, and I think there's a maturity component as well. Because if you are going 100% based on emotions, I mean, you could be married at 18 to like a drug dealer because you're in love with them. But there needs to be literally like some logic behind that as well. And I think that comes through maturity.
I also would say love is also a verb.
Yes, it's a feeling and a verb, and I think both need to be in.
Where do you get the idea that it's a feeling? Anytime I see love in Scripture, it's always a demonstration.
A verb.
It's never a feeling.
I think it's also an outpouring of love, and that would be an emotion.
I think the emotion is secondary. I'm fairly convinced that this emotional component, we've elevated it to be the primary, and it is very much secondary. Because I can love my wife when I don't feel like it.
Yes, but I don't think that that's necessarily the way that the Lord intended romantic relationships to be. I think that would be more friendship, because I can have action and like intentionality in a friendship, but the love, the romantic love that the Lord has blessed us to be able to have should be exclusive to one relationship, which would be the one.
But didn't the Lord give us romantic relationship to be fruitful and multiply?
Yes, but I also think that there's a distinction between an animalistic type be fruitful and multiply and a human being be fruitful and multiply. He has given us the ability to have thoughts and feelings and emotions and be attracted to the opposite gender. And I think that you'd lose out, like I said, on humanity if you take that out and you just say two people go build a life together.
I don't disregard that the love feeling is an important component. I don't think it's the starting point, though. Because the love feeling will come when you choose to act love towards a person. The act comes first, and you continue doing the act until you feel it. That's one of the fundamental advices that's given by marriage counselors, is you look at a couple who's fallen out of love or is considering divorce or whatever, and you say, if you're a Christian counselor, you say, well, what are you actively loving? Mm-hmm. Like, I get you don't feel love, but why don't you try a week of acting out your love for the person? And what inevitably happens is, as people start to engage in those actions that say, I love you and I'm going to do this thing, or I'm going to behave in a way that puts you first, the feeling, the emotion follows. Mm-hmm. So the causality, I think causality is really important in this discussion.
Yeah.
The action comes first. And so it doesn't matter who the one is. Whoever fills that spot, whoever I say I'm committing that this person's going to fill this slot, they become the one. And then that love feeling will come, regardless of whether there's infatuation, I think, is another word that we can use. That a lot of what you're describing sounds to me like infatuation,
yeah,
which is fun, but it's temporary, and
It is
isn't,
temporary. I
it's
agree with
not
that.
it should be a component, but a mature relationship doesn't require infatuation to be successful.
No, but I think many mature relationships are sparked by infatuation, and then they continue to stoke that fire.
So, how do we bring light? How do we bring the Ember Exchange component? What are we contributing to this conversation?
I think if I were to highlight a few things, regardless of the distinction you make of you choose the one, they fill this slot, anyone can be your one because we believe that once you've entered the covenant of marriage, that is your one. Doesn't matter. We all agree on that. So I think that a wise way to approach it, if you're going to go with Heidi's approach of feeling all the things and enjoying all the lovey-dovey things and being infatuated with whoever and finding out all the things about a person, not seeing any red flags and being like, yeah, that's the one, is always keeping the correct perspective that they can be all of those things to you, and that's really amazing. It feels really good. It's really exciting. But not to turn that into those unrealistic expectations that this person is going to fulfill. We still always have to remember that our identity is in Christ.
Yes.
And so not losing yourself in the search for the one.
Which I think is all too common.
Finding someone that you think is going to be the one, and it's just going to be all butterflies and roses from then on out. Because then that goes towards the point that I think Dylan was making. We're agreeing at the point of the covenant being made, that is now the one for you. And that is a permanent state that at that point, no matter how you are feeling, you have to do the love, you have to do the action, you have to be involved in that marriage every single day, whether you feel the feelings or not, or have all of the butterflies forever, which you won't. Some days you will, some days you won't in marriage. And so you still have to do those things. And why are you doing them? Well, you're doing them because you want to honor the Lord in that covenant that you've made. You want it to be a representation of, right, Christ and the church. And that requires some effort sometimes. More effort sometimes than other times. Because I've said I'm going to. I said I was going to today, tomorrow, and forever.
I feel like that was a really good synopsis of a mature way to approach dating and marriage. If I could give advice to some fellow single and dating embers, it would be to continue to grow in maturity, because I think while I really do believe that there is a one, and I really encourage you, if you're feeling discouraged and not being able to find that person, you're like, there's 15 different dudes that, like, yeah, they're nice, but like they don't feel right. Don't get discouraged in that, but instead pray for maturity and to be able to have your eyes open to someone who is interested in you and give people a chance. But don't get discouraged by not finding the one yet, because I truly do believe that the Lord knows the desires of our hearts, and He will make it evident who that person is supposed to be. And then once you do make that decision, continue to grow together towards the Lord and not just towards each other, because I think we can easily idolize relationship and marriage, and we can idolize almost every life stage that we aren't in yet.
Yeah. One thing that we didn't talk about at all was singleness, which can be a gift from God. So that could maybe be a whole nother discussion. So just to acknowledge that. I guess to put a cap on my perspective on this, once you make a decision to be with somebody for the rest of your life, that is your one. And in my mind, that's a very freeing thought, because the responsibility is now on how you go forward, right? There's no looking back once you make that decision. It's all forward from here. How am I going to grow? How am I going to encourage this person to grow? How are we going to grow together to be more like Christ? So you're not missing something. If you're recently married and you're wondering, oh, did I miss the one? No, you didn't miss the one. If you aren't married and you've got a dozen different people, I think that whoever you choose, once you choose them, that's the one, and you're going to look ahead, right? You're not looking back anymore. And it's always towards more Christ-likeness, towards that representation of Christ in the church, which is an illustration for marriage, as Paul would say. So yeah, there's not space for wondering or doubt once you've made that decision. It's full steam ahead in the most encouraging way. Welcome to the interlude portion of this. This is my favorite part and certainly Jill's least favorite part, but maybe we'll come up with other interludes at some point. But for now, it's just let's taste some whiskey with Dylan. When we were planning for this earlier today, choosing what we were going to taste, I made fun of Heidi because she spelled it whiskey with an EY. But today we actually have some Scotch whiskey, and fun fact about Scotland is that they don't put the E in it. It's WHISKY. So today we've got the Dalmore aged 14 years. This is a Highland single malt Scotch whiskey, and I think the bottle looks super awesome, which is part of the reason I got it. It is 43.8%, so 80, what is that times 2? 80 some.
What was it?
43.8 times 2 is
87.6.
Well done. I'm the engineer, and I can't even do the math in my head.
I didn't even try.
Anyway, so Jill, would you be willing to crack this bottle open here? And I'm going to look at something on what we're supposed to be tasting, because I'm more experienced than either of you, but I still don't know what I'm doing, and I need somebody to tell me what this stuff tastes like. So,
Okay.
There's a little antler set on the
Show the people.
on that cap.
You see it, Embers?
And then there's another one on the top of that one, which is the real cap.
Wow.
And this beautiful bottle.
It is
a
gorgeous.
pretty cool bottle.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to like anything that's inside the bottle, but
Heidi said it looked like juice. I think
Okay.
she's going to be disappointed.
I think I am too. Also, it was the lighting in the picture that he
isn't
sent
that
us.
a thing?
You sniff it?
You sniff the
Sniff
cork.
the
Yeah,
cap?
yeah.
Ooh.
It's a cork.
It's pungent.
But
I wouldn't.
It is pungent.
It's pungent, is what I would say.
As we get better at this, it would be great for us to guess what we're supposed to be tasting, but we're not there yet.
I would say that Dylan tries to do that. Not that you can't, but he's not proficient at that as of now. And he's been doing this for a year, dear.
about a year, yeah.
So,
I think that this is going to be...
is that right? Is that enough?
That's perfect. Yep, we're just tasting. Eventually, I'm going to get some Glencairn glasses so that we can do this the right way.
It's something like... It's like earthy, like oaky, kind of. Or is that a way to describe
last
all
week
whiskey?
it was cedar, so it could be oaky.
I did read a review of this one earlier today that said that it gets better if it sits in the glass for a few minutes. So,
Okay, so we're going to let that
swirl it around,
happen.
let it sniff.
I think there's something sweet.
I think there's like coffee liqueur. A rose, coffee, and like a flower essence.
Do you think I can describe what I'm smelling because I can't picture it?
Let's go to the Dalmore website itself and see if it tells me what I'm supposed to be tasting.
If not, we can just tell the people what they will be tasting.
Some
from
vanilla?
Yeah, but I feel like definitely I tasted the vanilla last week.
I know, but I feel like I'm smelling vanilla this week.
I'm smelling
Okay, here we go.
like grapefruit.
That's not so bad, actually. So, the aroma, this is according to the Dalmore official website. The aroma should be warm honey dates, Seville orange zest, rich raisins, and allspice.
Well, I didn't get any of those right.
No, I didn't, but Now that I can smell it,
Oh, so
raisins for sure.
I did earlier say sweet, so that's probably the honey.
I should just smell more of my food so that I know what
Can
to
you say those again?
listen for.
Honey dates?
Warm honey dates, Seville orange zest, rich raisins, and allspice.
Allspice just generically being like...
Allspice is a
There's
spice.
a spice called allspice.
Like you put it in like cider and stuff.
Yeah.
It's a very fall-esque spice.
Are you guys familiar with it? So I made fun of Heidi a little bit for her not knowing that this is Scotch whiskey and not a different type of whiskey. Do you guys actually know what the difference is?
No idea.
Okay. so-
Rye just means that it has to be over something percent. I don't remember.
Good job.
Yeah, kind of. So the main distinguishing feature of Scotch is that it has to be made in Scotland. So this is a Highland. There's different regions in Scotland that distill Scotch, and they are known for having very different profiles depending on where you go. So like an Islay Scotch is going to be very distinctly Islay. Highland, I think, can be generally broader in terms of sorts of flavors that you can get. So this is a Highland Scotch. I believe that it is dominantly barley in the mash bill, as opposed to some of the other things that we've tried. So last time we tried a rye, which Jill is correct, for it to be labeled a rye whiskey, it has to be over 51% rye in the mash bill. And then the other common one that you see is bourbon, which has to be over 51% corn in the mash bill. They're all technically whiskey, but different subsets within that. But so this comes from Scotland is kind of the main deal about it. All right, are you guys ready to taste it?
Yes,
Okay.
we're ready.
No.
I put an ice cube in it today.
Okay, we're going to taste it.
All right, we're ready to taste it. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Here we go.
Cheers.
It never tastes like it should.
No.
It just...
What do you mean like it should? How should
like,
it taste?
honey dates don't sound that bad. And then I sip it and I'm like, that's sad. Why?
It really is.
You guys, this is expensive. Show some respect.
Okay, I respect it, man, but it doesn't mean I have to love it.
I can respect it by pouring it in your glass, right?
You can respect, but you don't have to love. Love requires action. And emotion. My emotions are telling me no, fam.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay.
Okay.
What sort
My
of flavors
emotions
do
are
you
telling
get?
me
Do you guys
this is
wanna-
not the one.
The one. Happy for you.
What do you guys get on the? Do you want me to tell you what you're supposed to be tasting, or do you guys want to guess?
I'll sip it.
Oh, yeah, because the smell and the taste are two different things.
They are.
See, I keep
Maybe
thinking,
that's the problem.
Yeah, I
That's
think
dumb
that's it.
because
Well, no-
I want it to taste. If I tasted honey dates with orange, I think I wouldn't be as sad.
right. It
One
would
of
be as
the
thrown
flavors
off.
is dates.
I didn't.
Well, okay, so they can be sometimes the same and sometimes not.
Yeah. Oftentimes you'll have some of the same in the palate that you have in the aroma.
Okay. Just rubbing alcohol.
I taste some like chocolate and or coffee or something.
Yes, roasted coffee is in fact one of the flavors.
Oh,
Perfect.
I don't like that. Maybe that's why.
Okay, so the palate is figs, dates, toasted hazelnuts, roasted coffee, and maple syrup. And then the finish is rich dark fruits, licorice, marmalade, and
Black licorice.
The licorice for
I
sure.
got licorice, and I
Got
don't like
it.
black licorice or coffee.
and
Cool.
depths of cocoa.
Yes.
Dark chocolate.
That's I smelled the coffee
That's why.
and the cocoa.
You did smell the coffee. You said
And
that
I tasted
earlier.
the cocoa. It's interesting.
But I don't like black licorice, and I don't like coffee. That makes sense.
I arguably like this much better than last week's.
So
That's amazing for a number of reasons, and not terribly surprising. A, this is much older than what you had last time.
Okay.
14 years is pretty decent for a Scotch, at least in my collection. I'm not a high roller. But also, in my experience, Scotch will give you a much broader range of flavors than you'll get out of bourbon or rye. So rye is very much characterized by what people call rye spice or baking spices, and you get some other notes in there, but that's the dominant thing. Bourbon is often dominated by caramel vanilla flavors, but like scotch can be anything. Like I have scotch that tastes like a mouthful of campfire. I have scotch that is reminiscent of raspberry jam.
Ooh.
This one, I am very much getting the roasted coffee for sure.
The coffee is strong. Put this in some coffee, dude.
Yeah, this is very nice. I am enjoying this tremendously, and I'm very glad to hear that Heidi likes this better than some of the other options. So maybe I'll bring scotches more often. What is your review, Jill?
I don't like it very much.
You don't have to.
Maybe through doing this you'll acquire a taste.
I think she said no, I never will.
That sounds like a choice.
Can't be love.
Can't be so.
And that has been Whiskey Tasting with the Embers. All right, so for our second topic of this episode, I'll call it the cultural segment, perhaps. If we have the first segment is more philosophical, the second one is more cultural. We're looking at something that kind of blew up a little bit on social media since we last met, and that was a bit of conflict on the conservative right on what should be done in the event of students supporting Hamas, I guess. So to summarize, right, we've got a pretty substantial conflict raging in the Middle East. On one side, we have Israel, the nation state of Israel. On the other side is Hamas and Palestine. And it's been interesting to follow who has supported each side, which hasn't always fallen exactly along the party lines like you might expect, and who has chosen to abstain or hold a slightly third perspective opinion on those sorts of things. But regardless of how you come down on that particular conflict, that's not what we're debating or discussing today. There are individuals who feel very strongly one way or the other. And the group of interest for our conversation today is a group of students at Harvard who saw fit to sign their names to a letter in support of Hamas against Israel. And in response to that, there has been a lot of backlash from donors to Harvard University, as well as high-level employers who have said that they will not hire these students under any circumstances due to the sorts of things, the language that they have used and the positions that they have supported. And there's been a bit of a rift on the conservative side on whether that is a good choice, because generally speaking, it seems that most conservatives are in support of Israel, and so the reaction has been to condemn those who support Hamas and support this decision to blacklist, in essence, these students who have put forth opposing views. But others have said that is exactly the sort of thing that we accuse the left of a lot, is canceling people for speech. And if we truly are First Amendment absolutists or proponents of free speech, then we also need to protect the people whose speech we don't necessarily agree with.
Yes.
So I'm interested to hear how you guys come down on that. What is the appropriate way to handle individuals who say things that could be categorized as objectively bad, in a sense?
So I kind of think that there's an extension to our last episode a little bit. And if you didn't listen in episode 1, we talked a little bit about Second Amendment and red flag laws, but how that kind of bleeds into the First Amendment as well. So the extension with all of our freedoms that we have in the United States of America, those freedoms apply to us, and they also apply to people that we might argue are saying stupid things or they're saying horrible things. And just because we disagree with them, they still have freedom of speech in this country. Now, I would also lean towards the argument that in college, you're kind of dealing with kids still. If I I guess, signed off on every single thing I did in college? Would employers decide they weren't going to employ me too? But those were dumb choices I made as essentially a kid in college.
So is there some sort of speech someone could either say or affirm that would make you consider disqualifying them from employment? I can think of an example actually that comes straight out of our story here actually. So in response to these students participating in the protests or signing this open letter, a different set of students took the names and identities and photos of those students and plastered them on the sides of a big box van and started driving it around the neighborhoods around Harvard, essentially doxing the students who had said and done these things. So is their right to say whatever they want also protected in that they're giving out personal information on people that they don't like?
Politicians and all of them get their names and phone numbers and home addresses plastered all over the place, and it
Yeah, but
seems
you're a
as if
private citizen.
they're all running and being allowed to do all of those things consistently as well.
Yeah,
But they opted into
yeah.
that.
When
But
you
did these students who signed this, what is it, petition? Open letter, did they open themselves up for this?
that's where the question gets weird because in theory, then you could extend that argument of they said something publicly, therefore they are open to having their private information shared. That extends to us.
Yes.
We're sharing some opinions publicly here. Are we voluntarily then saying that anybody is free to publish our address and other private information publicly? I think no. The answer is definitely no. And it's considered a very despicable journalism practice, journalism in quotes, journalism practice to do something like that. And leftist journalists engage in that sort of behavior all the time. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Taylor Lorenz. Oh boy, she's a piece of work. But she's been known very much to publish the private information of people that she doesn't like or that say things she doesn't like with the intent to get them fired or have people show up at their house and threaten them. And that's not okay, right? I think protecting people against doxing is an important component of protecting your right to say things, because otherwise you live in fear of the mob.
I was going to ask you, can you define doxing for us?
Yeah. Doxing is the sharing publicly of information that would normally be private, typically identifying information with the intent to harass or intimidate the person. So that'd be like somebody bought a billboard and said, Heidi says mean things, and then put your address on the billboard with your picture, hoping that somebody will see that and say, I don't want Heidi to say mean things. I'm going to show up at her house and threaten her as an attempt to silence you, right?
Yes. I have pretty strong opinions about that. I think it should never be tolerated. Because I think that the moment that you tolerate doxing against someone that you disagree with is the moment that you open yourself up to being doxed. If that makes
Doxed.
sense.
No, absolutely.
And that opens up to, again, what we talked about last episode, episode 1, where you don't know if someone's telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
So while it might be valid that these people who sign this open letter, well, that might be inherently evil and we disagree with that, and that might be true, the next time it might not be true. And it can really seriously impact someone's reputation, and the rest of their lives are completely ruined based on falsehood.
Yeah. So what this ends up being summarized as is there are certain things where we would draw the limits on free speech, which is interesting.
Free speech in the sense of these thoughts or ideas are my own, not someone else's. Because doxing would be sharing the information of someone else, not your own. Me giving your address is not my own thought. That is something that belongs to you. It's no longer unique to what I have to share.
Right. So, like, defining what speech is. So, speech is unique thought and opinion and discourse versus like a physical address, or like we all agree with HIPAA that like your medical information should never be shown. So we do agree that there's certain information that is separate from speech.
It's probably easier to define what doxing is and say we don't want that than define what speech in general is and say we do want that.
Yeah.
So we would say
Right.
publishing somebody's private information with the intention to intimidate them or bring harm to them, that shouldn't be allowed. And that's specifically what we define doxing as. Anything outside of that, not anything, but in this, for the purpose of this conversation, anything that's not that is considered speech, free speech. And so we would say protect that. If your definition becomes too broad, it's very easy then to start seeing where people will abuse that definition to silence things they don't like, not just things that are within the understanding of a very bad thing.
Right.
So to bring it back, though, to the subject matter, then, these students who sign this open letter, it seems that we would say they shouldn't be precluded from pursuing job opportunities because they chose to support even what we would objectively say is an evil organization, right? Even people who I would say have a more nuanced perspective on the conflict, where you can't just say one side is the epitome of good and one side's the epitome of evil. Those people would still tend to say that Hamas is a terrorist organization. They're not good guys.
Right.
Whereas these students, specifically, they were blaming Israel for atrocities committed by the Palestinian terrorist organization Hamas.
They were blaming Israel. They were not necessarily standing up for Hamas.
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
Though there are individuals who have expressed support for Palestine and Hamas. So the question is, should they be precluded from having jobs? Now, this goes a little bit into a free market perspective of an employer should be able to hire whoever they want to hire.
Yes.
And so if an employer looks at this and says, boy, you signed onto this letter that's kind of terrible, I don't think I want to hire you, the employer should have the freedom to do that.
And they do that now. Every background check that you do looks into your social media history, like your whole life
Been involved
history.
in,
Yeah,
where you went to school, what clubs or organizations were you a part of?
And so all of that can tell enough about a
Yeah.
person on whether or not the employer wants to hire them. And that's why things are getting more and more divisive as well within the United States, because like if a traditionally conservative employer receives an application from someone who was liberal when they were back in college and now is more conservative, a lot of their liberal posts and things might be out there and they might not hire them because of that.
Which the employer has the prerogative to do.
Correct. And they should have the prerogative to do that.
So then what would we say is the mistake or the wrongness in making a list of these students and saying this list is available for anybody who chooses to look at it and decide they don't want to hire them?
I don't think that there's anything wrong with listing the names of the people who signed it. They listed their own name on something that they signed. Like, that can be public information. They've made the information public. What I think is wrong is listing their name and their address and their phone number, opening them up to potential danger.
Certainly the individuals who decided to dox these students, that I think we have agreed that that's not appropriate.
Right.
The idea of blacklisting, though, is creating a list of people who a bunch of employers agree not to hire because they've said certain things or have certain beliefs.
Oh, so these employers like literally come together and say we're not going to hire
Yeah.
any of these people.
Correct.
I think
without-
the issue for that is they're using like one instance. Again, they are kids and people can say stupid things, but people also can change, or their beliefs can also be affected potentially by those around them. Peer pressure is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not really getting a full picture just by blacklisting them on this one matter. It's not just one thing that they've now decided this is off the list. Nope, no go, right? There may be some specific like hard blocks on those things for some employers, right? Like if you can't pass a background check or you can't pass a drug test or you can't do those things, then we have to say no. But before they get to that point, they take a poll on all of the other additional pieces and details.
It's the whole idea of kind of innocence until proven guilty, which is what I think should happen when you're walking into a potential employer's office.
Yeah.
The reality is, it should be, okay, I have 15 applicants who are actually interested in my company that I get to do a background check on and have an interview with. And then if one of the applicants stands out and I do a background check and I see back in college 15 years ago you had these stances, you can open that conversation up with the person who's interested in your company. Like, that's the only...
Do you think that should be a valid criteria for employment? Views that you held 15 years ago?
Well, that's the point, is that you see that happen 15 years ago. You're like, that's not something I'm interested in having in my company today. So I'm going to call the applicant and say, hey, we really enjoyed like your interview. We liked what you had to say. I did notice these things in your background check or from a reference that I heard. What are your thoughts on it today? And they can have an opportunity to say, yep, I made that mistake 15 years ago, own up to it, and say my views have changed. This is who I am. And then the employer can go from there.
Should present political views, if they're irrelevant to the function of the job, play any role in whether or not you hire a person?
10 years ago, I would have said no. Today, I say yes. Because I think political views tie so tightly with mission and vision and values of who you are as an individual today.
What if they're fully qualified? In fact, maybe in that pool of 15 applicants, they're the most qualified person.
But they have a different political...
I would argue no. I want to hire people on my team that are going to accomplish the task at hand, and I hope that during the interview process and going through all of that, I can help determine, in that kind of short snippet of who they are as a potential hire, that they're going to do the job well. And if I believe that that's the case, I don't care.
Yeah, I think it depends on the type of organization as well. Because many organizations tend to foster a culture. And so if you're trying to foster a particular culture, and that's part of the interview process, is to see if you're going to fit well. If you have like a 90% Christian company and then you have like 2 people in there who are like LGBTQ, purple hair, totally, they might be qualified, but they're not going to gel, which could be ultimately detrimental to your team. But then also there's the argument of like diversity and equity and inclusion, which could be a whole other podcast.
Sorry, to bring it back though.
Yeah.
There's a point that you made that I think is interesting. So this particular article described the students as blaming Israel for atrocities committed by Hamas, which you noted is not the same as venerating Hamas.
Correct.
It seems, however, not just in this particular topic, but in a number of topics recently, that if you aren't for something, then you're against something. Individuals on either side will say, unless you're for us, you're against us.
Yeah.
And essentially try to force somebody into a perspective that is one of the two extremes. What are your thoughts on that in this situation? Is somebody signing a letter blaming Israel for the conflict the same as venerating or supporting Hamas or not?
I don't think it's the same thing.
I would agree.
Okay.
I was reading about this topic, and obviously it all links back to the current events of what happened in Israel with Palestine. One group that kind of had this happen to them, I think it's like a college campus group. I think it's called, or from my understanding, it was called Jewish Voice for Peace. It's a group of Jewish students that come together. And they specifically, when it kind of at the peak of things, I guess, in early October, because it all happened on October 7. So the weekend or two after, there were various protests and people coming out saying all the things, right? And like you said, if you're not for something, then everyone says, well, you're automatically against it. And if you're not against something, then you're definitely for something. Even if you didn't say anything on the topic, it's completely black or white. There is no other option. And there was a group of Jewish students in this Jewish Voice for Peace group. They went out and they protested. They had their signs and they were just calling for a ceasefire from both sides because, as maybe their name of their group may call out, Voice for Peace. They just want peace. They just said, make it stop. I don't care how it stops, but everybody stop. And many news outlets and other groups of Jewish people, alike and unalike, were like, oh, well, they're anti-Semite. They're Jewish.
Yeah, literally.
They're literally Jewish.
The black face of white supremacy, I'm telling you.
Yes. Like, these students were just saying, no, we don't want to see anyone else dead. They were literally just calling for peace.
Yeah.
In the words of ceasefire. And they just got smeared all over the stinking place. They didn't say they were pro-Hamas, but all of a sudden they were anti-Semite and they were pro-Hamas and they were the worst thing that had ever happened to the Jewish community, which I think it's equivalently as silly as these students that are, they're blaming Israel for the conflict. I don't think that they're saying, and maybe some of them are, right? They didn't divulge all of the details. They just signed this open letter and said, yep, that's where we're at.
Yeah.
But some of those students may also not be like, hoorah, rah, go Hamas either. There's a lot of people kind of in the middle or just like moderate about the topics.
Yeah.
But you're not allowed to be moderate. Therefore, we as in the groups that are on either extreme are like, well, you didn't say anything, so you're on that extreme side.
Yeah.
Like, well, I never said I was on that extreme side.
It's interesting when you think of these arguments in the context of war, right? And we should probably do a whole topic conversation on war from a Christian perspective. What does that mean? Is war ever okay as a Christian? And if it is, when is it? And what sorts of things are okay and not okay in that context?
Mm-hmm.
I think that an interesting thing that I also came across was apparently a survey done, and I should have written down like who did it, but it appears that those that are under 49 are getting labeled anti-Semite more frequently than those that are over 49. And that's because those that are over 49 seem to be voicing the opinion that they are more pro-war. And those that are under 49 are what I would argue is pro-American and anti-war. So they're saying, keep our troops home.
America first, you might say.
Yes, America first. Keep our troops home. We don't need to be involved in these things.
We have our own border to worry about.
We have our own border to worry about. We have our own cities falling apart. We have our own problems right here that need to be taken care of. We've got to start in the house before we can take care of what's going on out of the house. And it's also interesting that break is also the group, essentially, that at this point has lived through 9/11, Iraq, Taliban, all of the backlash from all of those troops going out. That age group is the group that has come back from Afghanistan and Iraq with the PTSD. They just seem to raise the question more frequently, like, why do we have to send our troops? Why are we sending our troops again? Why aren't we taking care of what's going on here at home first?
Yeah.
And in taking that stance, none, most of them have not also followed that up by being like, hoorah, hoorah, Hamas. Like, I'm good with what they're doing. That's perfectly fine. No, they're just asking those questions. And by asking those questions, they are then being labeled anti-Semite and just Israel haters and just unsupportive Americans. When in all reality, they are being more supportive of America by saying those things.
Yeah. I mean, arguably, if we go to war, we don't have a lot of young men who are actually fit for war, but that's a whole other topic too. Okay, Dylan, but we don't want you deployed. I don't want you deployed.
Me neither.
What would this podcast be without me?
Nothing.
Nothing.
We very different.
It'd be very different.
The thing that I always have to remind myself in this particular instance is that neither side is Christian. And I think a lot of individuals on the right tend to have an affinity for the Jewish people because that is where Christianity came from, right? Jesus himself was a Jew, the apostles were Jews. And so there's this natural proclivity to support anything that has the label of Jewish or Israel on it without understanding that that doesn't automatically make it right. Even in the Old Testament, if we look at the nation of Israel, when they were very explicitly God's chosen people, they were often in the wrong, so much so that God brought judgment on them from the foreign nations and exiled them, right?
Yes.
So just because it's Israel doesn't mean it's right. And I think a lot of conservatives fall into that trap. On the flip side, just because it's against Israel doesn't mean it's right either.
Right.
Right. And especially, like, again, if we use the Old Testament as an example, the Assyrians or the Babylonians weren't good guys when they were ransacking Jerusalem and exiling the Jewish people. They were being used by God, but that didn't make them the good guys. So to wrap my perspective on this issue, I kind of have to bring it back to myself. If I hold that perspective, and that's enough for some employer to look at me and say, oh, you're not worthy of working here because you decided to not take an extreme perspective on this issue, that kind of sucks. And just because, these individuals probably disagree with me on most things in life, I feel weird taking a position that they should also be denied those opportunities just because they decided to express their First Amendment right to free speech.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with all that. I don't think that blacklisting or doxing is right. I also think that we just have to be so careful with what we do online and on social media and what we're signing, because no matter what our thoughts here at this table are, or no matter what your personal thoughts and opinions are, the reality is that doxing and blacklisting do exist.
That's a really good point.
And so you need to not be publicly signing things. And like here at this table, we even had a discussion about, okay, we're putting our thoughts and opinions out there publicly. We're open for public, what's the word? Criticism, yeah.
Critique. All of those things.
All of those things, and we're aware of that.
Maybe response, because I certainly hope there are some members out there who are enjoying what we have to say and have positive things to say. But
yeah.
You're absolutely right that when we put our ideas out publicly, we all looked at each other and said, yeah, we are willing to stand by what we say. And if that means that somebody doesn't like me because of that, or they want to hate me because of that, I'm okay with that.
Or they don't hire us.
Or they don't hire us because of
10
that.
years because we have this podcast out here. Like, that's understood that that's a potential repercussion for what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so I think I would just encourage everyone to understand that everything that you do on social media, everything that you sign, letters and petitions, all have the opportunity to be used against you. So just be very careful.
Right or wrong, whether we
wrong.
agree that it should be that way or not.
Yeah.
Yep.
That is the reality.
Yep.
And so be very strong in your opinions and thoughts before you put them on social media or sign a petition. And if you're willing to die on that hill, then die on that hill. Like, good for you. That's amazing. If you're not, then maybe don't do it.
Yeah. And that's not to say that you shouldn't hold strong opinions or
Right.
voice them publicly.
Right.
It just means be prepared for what could happen if you do.
Both positive and negative.
Yeah, because there's going to be both.
thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on this episode of the Ember Exchange. I've really enjoyed this time spent with my co-hosts here discussing relevant topics that I've been thinking a lot about, and it sounds like you guys have been thinking about as well. As always, we want to be truth forward in what we're talking about and put Christ at the center. So hopefully we've been able to do that a little bit today.
Yeah. And being truth forward, we would love to get an honest review from you guys. If you can leave us a 5-star review, even better. But give us your feedback, what you liked, what you didn't like, maybe what you want to hear more of.
Yeah. Like, comment, subscribe. It all really helps get this podcast out to more embers just like yourself. So burn bright embers. We appreciate you.